Hello, everyone. It's great to be talking to you today. My name is Stuart Hearn, and I'm the CEO of ClearReview. And I'd like to give you a very warm welcome to this webinar on making the cultural shift away from appraisals. Now, it's clear that annual appraisals and performance management continue to be a really hot topic, and we're delighted to have so many people have registered for today's webinar and been joined by so many great companies as well. Now, it's been very well covered in the media that traditional annual appraisals are broken and that we need to move towards a more continuous approach to performance management and something that's more meaningful. But what's not been spoken about so much is how you go about making that transition towards such an approach. And probably the biggest area of concern that we at ClearReview are hearing right now from companies is how to embed the culture to support regular conversations and regular feedback. So to answer this question today, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome one of our ClearReview customers, Francis Lake, who is Head of Organisational Development at Clydesdale Yorkshire Banking Group. Clydesdale transitioned away from annual appraisals to a more continuous performance management approach in October last year, using ClearReview as their supporting technology. So today, Francis is going to be explaining how they tackled the culture change associated with their new performance management approach, how they achieved some success through smart design and simple execution, and how they redefine what success looks like for performance management using data to drive improvements. He's going to be joined today by Lauren Callum, Performance and Culture Lead at Clydesdale, who's going to be interviewing Bryce, Gary, and Robin, who are all managers at different parts of the Clydesdale group, to understand their experiences of performance management and how the changes impacted them personally as managers. But before I hand over to Francis, I'd just like to address a question that some of you might be thinking, and that's, why is a technology company like us talking about culture change? Well, the reality is that technology and culture are more linked than we might at first think. When changing your performance management approach, it might be tempting to think that you need to address culture change first and then look at technology after that once a new culture is embedded. And in fact, many of the organizations who approach us have tried just that and have failed to get the traction they wanted. And the reason for that is that technology is an essential ingredient in achieving true behavioral change. So after Francis's presentation, I'll be spending a few minutes talking about the important role that technology does play in changing your culture and looking at some of the psychology behind how we build new habits. Before I hand over to Francis, we're going to dive into a poll. We've got 3 polls today. So the first poll looks at how you would describe your organization in terms of whether you're currently using annual appraisals, whether you're in the process of moving away from annual appraisals, or whether you've already moved to a more continuous performance management model. So if you can answer that question now, the options should be on your screen, and we'll be getting the results in very shortly. So I'll just give you a few seconds to finish answering those. Okay, so we've got a bit of a split. So 47% of you are currently still using annual appraisals, and 42% of you are in the process of moving away from appraisals, which really echoes what we're hearing as organizations, that a lot of people still haven't made the switch, but those who are making the switch are in the process, but concerned about how they're going to tackle the cultural change part of it. So it's great that we've got this topic today. And on that note, I'm now going to hand over to Francis from Clydesdale Yorkshire Banking Group.
Thanks a lot, Stuart, and hello, everyone. So we're going to talk about these sort of 4 elements in the next about 20 minutes. And really what I want to kind of talk about is how we set about making the change, the framework that we've taken, what's worked, and also some of the pitfalls. And then what does success look like? And I think to Stuart's point earlier, the technology that we have in place working with ClearReview is giving us huge amounts of insight, which we're then able to use to kind of drive more behavioural change, which is hugely powerful. So Dan, if we go on to the first slide, please. So I think that the first thing to consider in changing performance management is that it is a cultural change. I think a lot of kind of early moves in this space, people were kind of changing process or trying to treat it as kind of you get the mechanics right. But performance management is basically all about human behaviour. So you have to get people kind of doing the behaviours you're looking for. So how we set about doing this, I think the first piece was we really kind of listened to people. So before we got anywhere near designing the approach, we engaged with hundreds of colleagues and listened to their kind of stories and talked to them in really plain terms. Because the truth is, pretty much everybody has some scars from performance management. So whether that's kind of talented colleagues whose careers have progressed quickly, but they find themselves at the bottom of pay scales year on year, whether it's people who get low ratings that they think are unfair, whether it's people who get kind of surprised, whether it's the folks who get a message from the boss that says, I'd love to have given you such and such, but in practice, I wasn't allowed to. And the truth is that you know, pretty much everyone kind of knows that this sort of old approach doesn't really work. And that stems from lots of feedback we had at the very outset was it's bureaucratic. So people spend hours producing a set of goals with detailed smart objectives that then go and sit in a drawer or a virtual drawer. That their work doesn't run in calendar years. So having a scorecard that runs on that basis isn't true. The priorities change faster than they ever did before, so you're either constantly updating it or it's out of date. There's always an element of recency. So we had phrases like, there's no point having a good Q1 because it's forgotten by the time you get to year end. That we'd have a forced curve or a normal distribution. And so what that means is your information shows you that your people are performing the same this year as last year. And we all say that's because we've exited the bottom people and we've reset the bar. But when your management information isn't showing you can't know that you've kind of raised performance. And then you kind of have your year-end appraisals, and people say they have the discussions with the boss, but they know that isn't what determines their rating. That what actually happens is some behind closed doors calibration session. And then those of us who go to those calibration sessions know they're a game in themselves. People turn up with their tactics. Some people are kind of try to keep quiet so that nobody notices the ratings they've given their people. Others attack each other, and on it goes. So from kind of start to end of the year, there's dysfunctional practice, and everyone knows it. So what we did right from the very outset was spend time talking to people, listening to their real challenges, reflecting them back to them in really kind of plain language. And so we talked to unions, colleagues, line managers, and all different parts of the group. The second bit in the culture change is lots of our colleagues in HR have got really sort of vested interest in keeping things the way they are. So you could change your performance management, but not create any kind of culture change because your underperformance approach pulls against it, or your reward approach, or your learning and development approach. And HR has spent more effort in refining the kind of old approach to performance management than anyone. So as an example, loads of performance approaches actually are there to drive reward outcomes, manage underperformers, and meet regulatory requirements rather than drive performance. So again, what we did is spend a lot of time early on with our HR colleagues and talk about the principles. So the first principle is performance management is there to manage performance. It's there to get better performance out of people. Any other decisions are downstream. So reward decisions, whether we can report to regulators, so on and so forth, that has to be kind of secondary problems to solve. The first one to start with is how do you raise performance? And then the other kind of piece is, in order to implement, you have to think about all the links to other parts of HR. So what's the focus on development? What's the focus on learning? What are the communications we make? How does reward support this? What are employment policies like? What are the case or advice colleagues talking to people about? And our first instance was we just gathered all of the information. How does it work today? What are the issues? What works well? What doesn't work well? Then the third step was engaging senior leaders. And with these guys, if you go to your executive team, those are the people who have proven to be most successful in a world of forced distributions and so on and so forth. By nature, they're the kind of top of the pile. So they're the people who are most likely to kind of think this performance approach must be good because it's got me promoted lots of times. So what we did was build a kind of qualitative and quantitative case for change. So some things were really helpful. Performance management was our lowest single score in our engagement survey. It was at 45% when we started our work. By the time we went live and we'd spent loads of time talking to people about the ills of performance management, it was down at 37. Our survey's next month. I am really hoping it goes up, otherwise I'm in trouble. So we were able to share that with the leadership team. We were able to share all the feedback from across the group, and we talked to them about it as an investment. So we spend £300 million a year on salaries and bonus every year. And there is no way as a bank we would treat any investment of that scale with the kind of, disregard that we do our people. So we had no information that would show that we were getting better performance, we were getting a return on that investment. And so what we were talking to them about is how we get to an approach where we get a better and better return on that kind of salary investment. So, for an industry like ours, that kind of really pricked up their ears. The other thing we had done with the leadership team before we got into sharing business case with them was a lot of work around mindset, using neuroscience and psychology to show what really motivates people, and that it's not about your annual bonus, it's about creating intrinsic motivation. So that was a huge, huge help. So with the LT sort of agreed and committed to it, their direct reports were the kind of next big bunch. We briefed them in detail 7 months before the thing went live. And that was to flush out all of their issues, all of their concerns, how we implement it. And it's fair to say that some of them at that point freaked out because they were used to thinking in terms of I motivate people through differentiated bonus. That's what I do. That's how I work. I don't see how this will work. I'll talk a little bit about how we overcame that. And then the last kind of piece is lots of test and learn. So all of this consultation we used to inform the design. So as an example, in the early design, we didn't have off-track ratings, which I'll show you in a moment. That was built in because of some of this early consultation. And we also used it to test stories, test the ways we described it, the way we articulated it to people. And that really changed the way we communicated performance. So it wasn't kind of big, grand corporate communications. It was much more human kind of comms. So if we pop onto the next slide, I'll talk about our approach. So one of my kind of greatest bugbears is I think within HR we can design great purist solutions that are really sophisticated and are really well designed, but are so complicated that our colleagues across our businesses don't know what to do. So it's kind of just over sophisticated. So I fundamentally believe that we have to design things that are smart in their thinking. We've done the sort of sophisticated thinking behind the scenes, but it's simple for people to use. So I always kind of use the example of the iPhone. Inside the iPhone there'll be some hugely sophisticated technology, but the way we interact with it is just beautifully simple. So it's a high bar for a performance management approach, but that's what we're aiming for. The big thing you're seeing on the slide here is this is a rich picture that our learning partners, Uncountable, did for us. And this captures our whole kind of colleague journey. We use this with people leaders and we use this with others to kind of set things up. But our approach is just 4 elements. And I think these start on the next slide, Dan. So we do not have individual scorecards. We set team goals. And the reason for that is none of us work in isolation. None of us can succeed alone. So teams set their goals together. And they do that at the start of the year, and then they will refresh on an ongoing basis. They set around 6 to 8 goals. And those should be their big priorities. And every single one of those goals ties into a group strategic goal. So it gives that kind of, the NASA janitor story of I'm putting a man on the moon. It gives people that connection through. It gets people to see what the teammates are concentrating on, and it creates that alignment. So the impact is We used to have 7,000 individual scorecards. We now have 1,000 team sets of goals. So that's 6,000 documents we've got rid of. We have better goals because people think about what they're trying to achieve and discuss and challenge each other, rather than the old kind of things where people are trying to work out what to fit into different sections. And the really important thing is people are more motivated when they're involved. And in this approach, they are involved in setting goals. The second element is personal goals. And each colleague has two personal goals per quarter. One that they think of and one that their people leader thinks of. And both of those are about things they're going to improve. So it's not like objectives. These are areas that I am going to get better at in these 3 months. Each one is linked to one of our organisational values. And the reason we have that short-term focus and just 2 things is because I can remember 2 things and I can concentrate on them for 3 months. So I think of it a bit like the couch to 5K, where you can go from sitting on your sofa to running a 5K with sort of 3 months of concerted practice. It's that kind of concept. And for those goals, we rate people in terms of their pace. So if you do your 2 goals, if you've made that improvement, you keep in pace. If you've gone above and beyond, you set in pace. If you've not met them, you build pace. And the reason for that is the days of saying, I just want to come in and do my job, they're long gone. That's a recipe for obsolescence. So this is all about personal and ongoing improvement. And it's not a house rating. It is a very narrow focus on, I want to get better at these things. Am I getting better at them? Am I concentrating on improvement? So we've gone to the next bit, Dan. So feedback is the magic ingredient. This is the thing that makes the whole approach work. And this is where working with Clearview, and I'm not just saying this because we're on a call with them, but working with Clearview has allowed us to do more than I hoped we would be able to in this kind of space. So first thing is we want loads of feedback. Make it really simple, make it normal, and get on and do it. So we had over 70,000 pieces of feedback in the first 6 months, which is kind of hugely, hugely successful. And the reason we try and get loads, make it simple, make it easy, is because we don't like doing this. Telling people things that are a bit awkward, we just shy away from. And the example we use with people is, given it's 1:20, this is probably very timely. We're very frequently, you kind of sit with someone having lunch, they get food stuck in their teeth. You can't help staring at their teeth when they've got sesame seeds or whatever stuck in there, but you don't say anything. And that person goes away for the rest of the day, and 4 hours later looks in a mirror, sees they've got stuff stuck in their teeth and is horrified. So that's a piece of feedback that will only give them a better day. That it is only good. And people shy away from it because it's awkward for maybe 10 seconds. So we have that as kind of natural human behavior. But in old approaches, we'd expect people to effectively sort of describe someone's overall worth in terms of feedback. So what we're trying to do is really simplify it. We ask for 2 sentences, which is basically 1 thing I like, 1 suggestion to make it even better. So that's genuinely constructive, trying to help people improve even further. So it's short feedback, it's frequent, each piece connects to a value. So we're also able to see the balance of our culture through the feedback. The impact of that is it makes people feel good. So you see people, like when they receive the email notification in their mailbox, they're straight onto Clearview to see what the feedback is, because it's exciting. It's creating conversations. So a lot of time people will follow up and say, okay, thanks for that. Can you explain a bit more or so on? And that's creating deeper relationships. So my boss, the group HR director, has called me over to her desk about 3 times to show me pieces of feedback she's received recently. So you're getting that kind of excitement and this kind of sharing of it. And then the last element is check-ins. So we encourage people to have them as frequently as they like, but at a minimum, we expect a quarterly meeting between colleagues and people leaders. And this is like a pit stop. That's the kind of thing. You take a pause, you look at how things have been going, you look at what next, you get going again. We had 98.7% complete them on time in the first quarter and a little over 99% in the second quarter. So huge, huge kind of success. And the flow of it is, the first thing is we talk about, is the colleague on or off track? So off track means there's a fundamental performance issue. It's improve or exit territory. That applies to about 2% of people. So we get it done, get it out of the way. So for 98% of people, their conversation is just about improvement. Then they concentrate on progress in quarter, a review of feedback, and agree goals for the next quarter. We don't have calibration, we don't have round tables, we don't have year-end ratings. And the reason for that is, if someone is on track, then they are worth the salary we're paying them and they are getting better in their role. And if that's true, it doesn't matter whether they're better or worse than the person next to them, because they're a good investment for us as a group and they're doing a good job. So the whole onus is on making people feel good and building on their competence and their strengths. So that's a real kind of counter through the framework. Let's go and take a look at how we worked our way through. So next slide, please, Dan. So in terms of building momentum, I think the first thing is, I said we talked to the extended leadership team at the start of this journey. Every step of the way through, we would engage with people, refine the design, refine the communication. So lots of listening to people, discussing, explaining. My team and I, so Lauren in particular, who's with us today, we'd turn up at any meeting where people had let us turn up and talk about performance. Part of that was just engaging people, part was sharing the concept, and part was kind of building momentum. So we'd talk to our graduate trainees, we'd do sessions with 100 managers, we'd do calls, basically anything. The reason for that is it's a tough change to make. So giving people a chance to ask their questions and test things out is far more constructive than some grand group-wide communications. Second thing is we sought to build a movement. We got as many people involved on the way through as possible. So we had a business readiness working group that was 10 of our senior leaders. We had a business proving group that was about 200 people testing the system. We went and talked to every leadership team at least once, some of them 2 or 3 times, which got us to reach about 150 folks. We'd spend time with our innovation and change function, our technology and change guys, working with about 120 people leaders there. We had around 90 positive leaders who worked with us on culture change, and Bryce, who's with us today, is one of them. And then my team and I we would just go and talk to as many people. Any session we were talking to folks, we would talk to them about this, even if the subject was supposed to be something different. So the whole thing was being quite evangelical about it. The third bit is we had loads of requests for technical training. And again, one of the great things about Clearview is it is a genuinely simple system to use. I think on kind of corporate technology, it's always described as intuitive, and that's because the user experience is lousy. Clearview genuinely has a great user experience. It is simpler to use than Facebook or Amazon or any of those kind of things. So we were really clear we did not want to do kind of technical training. What we were wanting to shift was conversations. So all of our training was about behavior and about conversations. Every single people leader in our business spent 4 hours going through experiential training, and that was working with Uncountable, who did the rich picture at the start. In that period, you had 2 hours where you effectively experienced a quarter performance management, and then 2 hours where you acted as manager. So it was tough and it was stretching. We had about 12 people who turned up and scored the training 0 out of 10, which I think reflects on them. But the vast majority of our people were really engaged in that kind of behavioural nature and helping them to get their head around how you set goals, how you give feedback, how you do check-ins and so on. So that piece of concentrate on the behaviour, not on the process, is critical. And the last bit on befriending the naysayers, with a change like this, there is loads of challenge, loads of concerns. We would get lots of snotty emails from people, which are the kind of having a go at anonymous sort of HR or head office and how disconnected we were. And what that really is an expression that people don't feel they've got a voice. So we'd pick up the phone or we'd go and see them, we'd go to meetings and we'd talk it through. We didn't respond with another email and more logic. because what was really sitting behind it was kind of fear or lack of understanding. So we'd go and have conversations that would convert people, and I'm sure Lauren could talk about that a little more in a mo. There are examples where we'd talk to people and it would shift them from basically spreading how bad the system was to how good the system was based on a kind of 30-minute conversation. So it is time consuming, but if you want to make the change, you've got to do the legwork on this. So let's go on to success. To the next bit, Dan. Hopefully, oh, hello. Let me start. So first and foremost, the very first kind of thing is that success here is when people are more positive, who are more engaged, who are performing well and getting better. So I think we can skip on one more again, Dan. So this is a performance approach that is purely about encouraging feedback, having the right conversations, creating stretch, creating more teamwork. Probably my single best indication of success is the only time I've been involved in performance management in like 20 years in HR, where I've had unsolicited feedback from people telling me that this is a great approach and they actually enjoy it. Enjoyment and performance management aren't things that tend to go hand in hand. Dan, do you want to skip on one? So I think there we talked a little bit about the great performance. You know, there is a lot of focus on the individual, but how that individual contributes to teams working together well. There's a huge element then of the feed into other people practices. So our reward has changed. Our bonuses are now team-based. This feeds directly into performance improvement, what we call our get back on track. And those two are completely connected, making it much easier to help people to raise their performance. We're building well-being into our check-ins to start normalizing discussions about kind of health and mental health. And it's also feeding into career conversations on our talent. So our performance, what we describe, our approach here, is firmly the foundation for our good management. And then data, so data is kind of really, really cool. I can't quite believe I've said that sentence, but I do mean it. What we're driving at is better conversations and better kind of one-on-one conversations and better team discussions. But we're really using data in order to drive that. So we can see who is and isn't having a check-in. We can see who is and isn't receiving and giving feedback. We can see what values that feedback is being given against. We can also see the quality of the feedback and the mixture of positive versus constructive. So we get a huge amount of richness. And so some of the ways we are using that are, as I said, we had over 70,000 in 6 months. 50% of that feedback related to one of our 5 values. And 3 of the values had less than 10% of feedback. So what that tells us is our culture hasn't quite got the balance we want. So in other interventions and in communications, we're dialing up the focus on the others. We are able to spot where there are anomalies, where people haven't quite got it. We had one people leader who rated somebody as off track who was on maternity leave. Thankfully now we were able to spot that, pick up with a people leader, correct it before it becomes a kind of issue. So we're able to kind of spot issues fast. Where people aren't having check-ins, we'd nudge the people leaders. We'd ask them what's going on and did they need help. It does 2 things. One, it shows we're watching, and secondly, it actually gives them help. For people leaders, we're starting to look at teams. So where there are teams where there's still no feedback 6 months in, and thankfully it's a very, very small number, we're getting in touch with those people leaders. We're inviting them to workshops. It's kind of like this sort of, you get 3 points on your driver's license, or you can come and join a workshop. And we're also providing the chief exec with information on each of his directs, so division by division, what climate has been created by the leadership team member. So you kind of put all that in place, and what it means is we have a system that is, or an approach that is about discussions, that's built on a volume of feedback, but is allowing us to see in far greater detail than ever the kind of performance that is going on. And what we're doing with the data and the insight is we keep on asking different questions, testing things out, and going and doing small and focused interventions. We're not trying to do blanket approaches. We're trying to kind of do more targeted bits. So that's probably a kind of a sort of summary of where we are. I know if I hand back to you, Stuart, and then I think move on from there.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Francis. I've got to say it's really fascinating to hear some really honest insights from the inside. We hear a lot of theory around performance management. To hear some actual practical things that you've done has been really interesting. One of the questions that's come in on the live chat here has been about ratings and bonuses, and we hear all this all the time. So it'd just be good to get your take. You mentioned about bonuses. A question that's come in is, in the absence of kind of formal ratings and calibration sessions, how do you go about handling bonuses?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. We've taken the stance that bonus, for the vast majority of people, bonus doesn't really drive superior performance, or really doesn't necessarily motivate them. And a lot of the things we've looked at, seen that people are more worried about getting less than their fair share than they are worried about getting the biggest bonus possible. So now I know not everybody would agree with that, and we have some people internally who don't agree with that. But where we are at is, if somebody is, everybody will get the same bonus across the group. By their grade, they would get the same bonus with a couple of exceptions. So if there's significant compliance issues, bonus would get docked or go down to zero. And if someone's off track, they would lose bonus. So lose 25% of bonus for every quarter they're off track. So that means the vast majority would get the same kind of bonus, and we'll have a small amount of discretionary pot that would give to maybe 5% of performers at the top end. But those amounts are much smaller. It'll feel more like kind of decent recognition rather than a kind of differential bonus. And the reason we've taken that approach is the bonus pot is determined by the company performance. And if we were to, you can't really have a kind of team ethos if you then start differentiating by team members on bonus in the end. And there was a lot of worry before we started, but we're seeing an awful lot amongst our most commercial teams that they're fine with it. They actually are embracing it, really.
Okay, great stuff. Really, really good to hear that, because as I say, it is a question that I hear a lot, and we're getting that through. Keep your questions coming in, everybody who's listening. So what we're going to do now is head into another poll. So the question this time is, how concerned are you that the management population wouldn't adopt a regular conversation approach? So the options here are very concerned, quite concerned, not concerned, or I have other much more significant concerns to worry about. So the answers are coming in now. And interesting, so we have the majority of you are quite concerned, and the second highest response here is very concerned. So it really does echo again what we're hearing and why we actually did this webinar, that people do have concerns about how they're going to get people on board with this stuff. And hopefully some of the things that you've heard from Francis will give you some insights and some ideas about how to tackle how management will take this. But actually, I think on this relevant point, it brings me nicely to hand over to Lauren from Clydesdale, because she's actually going to be speaking right now to some of the managers who've gone through this process. So I think for those of you who are concerned about that, this is going to give you a real insight from real managers who've experienced this to see what their views are. So I'm going to hand over to Lauren right now.
Thanks, Stuart. Hi, everybody. Okay, so I have got with me today Bryce Herbert, who is one of our positive leaders in the business, which Francis referenced earlier. Bryce is also an area manager for our branch network in Scotland. And I've also got Gary here, who is the manager of our wonderful Dumfries High Street branch. So I've got the honour of asking these guys some questions, and so I'm just going to get started. Right. So prior to the introduction of our new performance management approach, how did you guys feel about performance management in the bank in general? Gary?
Yeah, so I think Francis covered some of it off really well earlier on. The best words I would describe to use our previous approach to appraisals and managing performance would be stagnant. It felt almost like a lottery. I'll give you an example of I had 2 or 3 good performing people, good, well-performing people in my team, and I would basically, one year I would give it to one of them, the next year someone else would get a shot at the top bonus level because we just couldn't afford to give out what we wanted to do, because that's probably another good point as well, that people didn't believe in the system that we had. And if you don't believe in something, you're far less likely to take part and be enthusiastic about it and perform well. People probably thought that it was already decided, even so, halfway through the year. And I suppose in some circumstances they were right in terms of end of year ratings and how we came about them. I found that a lot of my members of staff didn't understand the system or didn't see where they contributed to the output at the end. It did drive performance to a certain degree, but it did encourage some poor behaviours, and with that came some poor outcomes for customers. The conversations that we used to have were very much from an organisational led agenda, and not really from an individual point of view, and that's probably one of the biggest, without going too far in my answer, that's probably one of the biggest changes I've noticed, that when we sit down and talk to our staff now, we're doing it very much from their view of the world and how they want to get better for themselves.
Brilliant. Thanks, Gary. Bryce, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'm not going to repeat anything that Francis or Gary has said, but I'm wondering whether the last survey question you asked there in terms of the adoption of regular performance conversations, that the answers that came out was based on how things currently are. So if I was asked that question last year based on the annual appraisal approach that we took, then I would definitely have scored it negative to say, we can't have these type of conversations more frequent because the amount of work and paperwork and gathering of information, whereas looking at the new approach is very, very different. So I would answer that question different because we have now moved over to the clear review piece. So that's probably a bit of feedback on that side from it. Yeah.
Well, okay, thank you very much. Okay, on to
Lauren,
my next question. Yes.
Sorry, but just before you dive into that one, we've got the questions flying in fast and furious here, and I think there's a really good one that's coming in because I've heard this a few times. Someone has said, if we're about conversations, it's strange that feedback is being shared via the system rather than verbally. And I hear it. People say, well, if it goes via a system, is that going to detract and stop people talking? What's you and your colleagues' view on that?
I'll take this one. So it's Bryce again here. When the system was rolled out and you're looking at the whole cultural piece, so I was quick at the start of the year so I lead a team of bank managers who ultimately have staff within their own branches. So it's quick to say, look, any sort of feedback that you're trying to give, especially if it's constructive side, you do it face to face and it's backed up by the input in the system. It's not to replace any face-to-face feedback. It's slightly different when you're given the positive bit of feedback. You still want to do it face to face, but as long as before you're landing the clear review system, you have conversations with your people or your people leaders that are there to say, look, you still have the face to face conversation. The system is there is just to back up what you have actually been talking about, not to replace the actual physical contact side of it.
Thanks for that. Great to hear.
I might just add something as well for me. What we've actually found is that rather than discourage feedback, it actually means there's more feedback happening. I'll give you an example. Possibly something happens where a member of staff might shy away from giving feedback. So what we've actually signposted is you call it out to that member of staff, but all you have to do is really tell them that you want to give them some feedback and give them a rough approximation of what it is, and then submit the feedback through the system. So you've signposted that you're going to do it, and it's a far easier conversation to have than what it could have been prior, and then the staff member can go on. And what we found, it does facilitate more conversations that are happening within the team.
It's interesting. You also get some language in the group of people saying things like, "Oh, put it in the system," or "put it in clear review." So people kind of actively asking for it in a way that I think we never had a language even to describe that before. And I think the other thing is so if someone's only putting it in the system, that's probably somebody who wasn't going to give that feedback at all before. So it's all progress and it's all progressive. So whether the verbal bit's first and then it's captured, or it's just verbal conversations, or it goes through the system and that's followed up with a conversation, I think all of those things are good. It's just getting more and more feedback.
Fantastic. Okay, back to you, Lauren, if you've got any more questions you wanted to ask.
Great, okay. So you guys are both people leaders or managers of teams. What does performance management actually mean to you guys as that people leader role? You know, what do you want from performance management, and what do you want it to be able to do?
Yeah. So the performance management side of things, it's always going to be the quality of your interactions and conversations with your people, whether it's, you know, high performers, people that need support and development, but you need something that works alongside those conversations, something that's clear and easy to use, something that ultimately the staff members take ownership of their own performance. Last year's, I suppose, appraisal approach, etc., it was very much dictated by the bank. You know, paper-driven conversations. People were coming along to annual reviews, knowing fine well that their documented year was already done by the people leader. Whereas this new approach, you're looking at the staff members having to update their own goals, so they update their contribution to the team goals, they're updating their contribution to the, you know, their own personal goals. It gives them a bit of ownership, but also, you know, they know how they are contributing to the overall organisation, which wasn't there last year whatsoever. Nobody really knew. So that performance management piece, the ownership, and it builds in that whole morale side of things. You know, the guys are definitely engaged to the bank, the performances, they know what's happening. They ask more questions as well. And actually, you know, the questions were asked about bonus and individual bonus and high performers. I'm seeing a real change to driving team success. That's the biggest part for me, is the team success part, whether not just individuals working to their own agenda. So that's a massive change. So the performance management piece, you need something that works alongside those conversations, and the ease of use thing, definitely.
Great.
I think as well you want it to be fun, and I've got my boss sitting next to me, and I'll be quite honest, in the room, under the old system, I wasn't a particularly good performer. He was always having to chase me up, and it was because I didn't like doing them, didn't look forward to them at all. And nowadays I'm probably one of the first to get them done because I really enjoy doing it. It facilitates a really good discussion with your team, and yeah, it sounds like I'm getting paid, doesn't it?
It does.
And I suppose I'll add a bit onto that from Gary's conversation. So, as Gary said, so Gary reports into myself, and I've got access of Gary's, whether it's his feedback, etc. Gary is one of the, I suppose, the early adopters into the requesting of feedback. So you give feedback and you also request it. So if I went into Gary's performance and I had a look at the feedback, that there's multiple occasions where Gary has requested feedback based on those check-in conversations. And to be honest, there's no negativity in there whatsoever. His team enjoy this new approach, and Gary requests feedback. Any sort of learnings within there is picked up and then moved on to the next sort of check-in. So yeah, it's definitely more beneficial.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I guess a big question, when you guys heard that the changes were coming, you know, so we're still doing old world roundtables, forced distribution curves, and then HR dropped the bomb that we're going to change the approach going forward. What were your kind of initial thoughts?
Skeptical. I have to be honest, I thought it was possibly a gimmick. Maybe something that we would put in place as an organisation, but not really follow it. But it was there, and it would look good from the outside. I suppose speaking from a team as well, as with anything new, there was a bit of apprehension. There was probably a few thoughts as to the motivation behind bringing this in from a few of my team members in terms of this will be something that comes in to make it harder to do things and to make those targets, even the more impossible to achieve and so on. So yeah, I think one word that sums it up for me would be sceptical. And just to draw on the last point, I've written down some of the feedback that we've received recently from our check-ins that have just happened. And some of the words we've got here are clear, clarity, easy to understand. I know exactly what I need to do, and I'm aware of my development areas. Conversations were more positive. I understand how I can contribute to the team. So just to draw back on the last question, that's something that I definitely wouldn't have got from my guys before this was introduced.
Lauren, I'm going to have to cut short your questions there because we're running short on time, and I think that's a really nice place to end that. So I'd like to thank you and your colleagues for some really good real-world insights. We're going to dive into one last poll now. This question here is, what is your organization's current technology state regarding performance management? So are you still using paper and Excel worksheets, or do you have some other clunky software in place? Have you got some more effective modeling software in place, or you don't have anything at all and need something? So be interesting to see what comes up from here. It's pretty clear that at this stage, the vast majority are still using paper and Excel spreadsheets for managing performance. And that ties nicely into the last bit of today's webinar, where I'm just going to briefly talk about the role in technology when changing a performance culture. So under the old world of performance management, tech was really designed as a data capture and workflow exercise. It could automate workflow processes, but under a more continuous model, we need to look to technology to provide more of a guiding framework. And what do I mean by a framework? A framework is the basis of what we need to do and how often we need to do that. Now, if you're moving to this new approach, a more continuous approach, you're likely to do some training or some communication with your staff. And maybe you'll have a slide in here that sets out your framework, something like this. So you'll say we want to have goals 1 to 3 each quarter. We would like feedback to be given at least monthly, and check-ins, say, every 8 weeks. And that's very straightforward to understand as a framework. But a month later or 2 months later, are people going to remember that? So what we need technology to do here is provide what I call a guiding framework. So this is what you would see on ClearReview every time you log in as a manager. So you can see here that I can instantly see what's required of me. I can see how I'm doing against the requirements, so how many of my team have had feedback recently, how many have had check-ins. And I can also get prompts and reminders of where I need to take action. So this is just one example of how systems can repeatedly reinforce framework. Another key aspect of why technology is essential when you're undertaking this cultural change is that having the framework is not enough. We need to change behaviors, and to understand about how we do this, we need to dive into a little bit of psychology. So Dr. BJ Fogg is the director of Behavioral Design Lab at Stanford University, and he's come up with a really nice, easy to understand model about how human behavior is driven. So his model is the catchy B equals MAT. So what we're saying here is behavior will only happen if the motivation is present, the person has the ability at that time to carry out the action, and that there's a trigger in place to make them want to do that. Only when all of these occur in sufficient force will the action actually happen. So from a performance management perspective, we can see that in terms of like the motivation aspect, we can run cultural workshops, we can run training sessions to help with the buy-in for that. In terms of getting the action and ability to take that action, we can help with the skills. But in terms of actually some of the providing the triggers and the actual action element of that, we do really need to rely on the technology. And to help explain that and illustrate that point, here's a couple of examples of how technology can automate the triggers. So without a system telling us what we need to do and when, it's very hard to keep track of the things that you need to do. And until the habits are ingrained, we need to rely on those triggers. Now, the MAT model says we need to have the ability to take the action. So what do we mean by that? According to FOG, we need to, ability will only happen if I can carry out that action in sufficient time, that there aren't too many brain cycles that I have to go through to get that. So what's the mental effort required? And it's also affected by how routine the action is and whether it breaks my existing routine. So the easier an action is on all three of these factors, the more likely a person is to actually take out the action. So let's use another performance manager example. So imagine you're preparing for a check-in conversation. First of all, you're probably going to try and find your notes from the last meeting, which may be in a book or stored on a drive somewhere. You dig that out. Then you'll go onto the company intranet maybe and download the check-in meeting form and remind yourself of the guidance of what you're supposed to talk about. Then you're trying to look for the objectives that were set previously, finding them on a spreadsheet somewhere. Then you're going to trawl through your emails to try and look for examples of feedback that you want to discuss, and then print it all out and take it into a conversation. So this is already looking pretty heavy in terms of the amount of time taken, the brain cycles involved, and the level of disruption to my routine. So according to what Fogg would say, only the most motivated of people would be likely to do this. And again, that is really the experience that we have found, that organizations who have tried to go down the continuous performance management route without the technology that can make this stuff simple aren't getting the traction, and this is the reason why. So let's compare this with what a check-in experience is like at ClearReview. So if we click one button in ClearReview, we have a check-in meeting ready to go. So what I can see here is I've already been provided with a set of prompts for discussion to talk through. So I don't have to think about the questions and look through my notes on the training course about questions that I need to answer. I have got my notes from the last check-in meeting, so I can pick up where I left off. I've got my objectives to hand, ready to discuss, and I've got my feedback ready to go. So in terms of the time required and the brain cycles required, it's significantly reduced, and that's how we get the greater levels of adoption. As one customer said to me recently, it's so simple that it actually removes the excuses about why managers aren't doing this. So you can then start to have genuine conversations with people about why they're not doing it, rather than blaming the process or the system. The last piece of the technology puzzle is something that Francis talked about, is data. We need to have insights from data in order to understand how to improve and what the adoption levels are like and where we need to focus our activities. And I'm not going to talk too much about it because, as I say, Franz talked about this in quite a lot of detail, which is really insightful. But just to say, to get that level of insight without a technology is nigh on impossible. So what technology does really well is it can summarize, it can provide you the information in summary or in detail. And just an example of another customer of ours that's used that really well is Newport City Council, who have used this data to create some manager dashboards and leaderboards, which they circulate internally, and that's increased accountability and adoption. Okay, so that's the end of the official part of the presentation. So we've got time for a couple more questions before we finish off. So we've got a question here for Lauren that's come in, and for the managers here. Let's just move. Have you seen a difference in adoption between different generations on your workforce? So, we've got obviously millennials, some older generations. Have you seen any difference in adoption between those?
I'm going to say no. I'll hand over to Bryce and Gary as well, but just to give my own example, one of my direct reports has been in the bank for 37 years, and so quite a while. He is one of the most proactive members of Francis and my team on the system. So absolutely not seeing a generational difference at all. I don't know, Bryce and Gary, if you're...
Yeah, I'll jump in. I'm not too sure whether there's a generational difference, but anyone whose PC skills were less, let's say, they probably had more fear at the beginning. As we've now, we're just over 6 months in, it is absolutely fine. But it's anyone with sort of PC skills thinking, oh no, we're moving away from paper, moving across, to electronic. They had a bit of a fear at the beginning, but once you do a bit of support and a bit of training and realise how simple it is to use, then those fears just go.
Okay,
yeah,
thanks.
I have a range of age groups within my team, and I haven't noticed any discrepancies whatsoever because it's so easy to use.
Okay, that's really, really helpful to know. Question that's actually coming for me, which I'm going to answer quickly, is about how you can make this work in a matrix organization where people might have different people leaders and direct project managers at the same time. And we've actually built that into Clear Reviews so that you can have multiple people accessing your records. So you could check in with one person for one type of check-in and with another person to have a different type of check-in with them. One question that has come in, which I think would be great for Lauren, your team to answer, is actually this might be one maybe more for Francis. You mentioned that you didn't have performance ratings. We talked a bit about bonus, but when you talked about getting rid of performance ratings and categories, did you get any pushback on that?
A bit to start off with, and we had a bit of challenge on the kind of pace bit. But the way we overcame it was talking about what we are interested in is whether people are getting better. So are they setting their own personal best rather than are they better than other people? So we use language a lot like, it's personal best rather than anywhere but last, which is what it was before.
Okay, fantastic. Well, we could probably answer questions for the rest of the day, but we've run out of time for this webinar. What we will do is we've got a note of the questions we didn't have time to answer, and we'll do our best to get back to you, the people who asked those with the answers. We'll also be emailing everybody a copy of the slides. So if you've registered, you'll get a copy of the slides. But I'd like to finish up by thanking Francis, Lauren, and the fantastic team over at Clydesdale Yorkshire Banking Group for their really great and honest insights today. And I'd like to thank everyone else who's on this call for attending, and I hope you found it helpful.